In the 19th century, archaeologists unearthed traces of Roman military camps and were utterly shocked. It turned out that the great empire had spent insane amounts of resources not on new weapons, but on organizing leisure activities. Why did the most aggressive army in human history care so much about a good night's sleep? The answer turned out to be frighteningly simple and pragmatic to the core. It is not the army that swings its sword the hardest in the first 10 minutes of battle that wins. The side that wakes up fresh in the morning wins, while the enemy collapses from utter exhaustion. Most ancient armies slept haphazardly, wherever and on whatever they could find. Barbarians would simply collapse onto damp grass after a long march, using their wooden shields as makeshift blankets. In the morning, they'd wake up with stiff necks, chilled to the bone, and angry at the whole world. Sounds like a typical Monday morning after crashing on a friend's floor, doesn't it? The Romans looked at this barbaric chaos and decided to turn sleep into a strict mathematical discipline. A Roman legionnaire marched 30 kilometers a day with heavy gear on his back. After such an exhausting marathon, any modern person would just want to collapse into a soft bed. But the ancient soldier would pick up a pickaxe and start building a perfect fortified city. And this happened absolutely every night, unless the army was leaving these places for good in the morning. My shoulders start to ache treacherously just from saying this fact out loud. Why waste precious hours of rest on chopping wood and digging deep trenches? Because absolute safety directly translates into the deepest phase of human sleep. If a soldier knows for certain that he won't be killed at night, his brain truly relaxes. Modern sports medicine experts call this effective stress management during physiological recovery. And Roman centurions simply called it common sense, 2,000 years before the advent of science. Today we'll take a detailed look at the hidden anatomy of Roman sleep under harsh combat conditions. We'll learn how a piece of ordinary wool protected against frostbite better than modern membrane jackets. I'll explain why a legionnaire was guaranteed to pay with his own life for accidentally falling asleep on guard duty. This is a gripping story of how Rome's iron discipline conquered the chaos of the wild. Subscribe to the channel, get comfortable, and let's dive into this incredible era together. The Roman army crushed enemies all over the world, but for a legionnaire, the center of the world was his tent. After long, grueling marches, the soldiers dreamed only of a safe shelter and a sound sleep. This basic unit was called a contubernum. The term literally translates to those who live in the same tent. 8 rugged men shared all the hardships of harsh army life. They ate from a single pot and slept side by side in a tiny space. The size of this dwelling resembled a very cramped modern bathroom. It sounds like the world's worst student dorm, where it's absolutely impossible to have any privacy. The soldiers had to tuck their legs in and carefully control their every movement. Not even every strong warrior could stand up to his full height, but it was precisely this incredible crampedness that saved their lives on a cold night somewhere in the forests of Gaul. Enemy arrows and the biting wind remained outside this small shelter. These field shelters were not made of lightweight nylon or the tarpaulin we are familiar with. Heavy, sewn-together calf or goat hides were used as the primary material. The tanning process was rough enough to preserve the material's maximum strength. The leather repelled rainwater perfectly and withstood strong gusts of wind. However, such reliable protection came at the cost of the structure's enormous weight. When dry, such a tent weighed nearly 20 kilograms. Weather conditions often took a brutal toll on life in the Roman camp. After a heavy downpour, the thick leather would inevitably get wet and absorb some of the moisture. The weight of the portable shelter would then double. Imagine carrying a wet St. Bernard on your back for a full 30 kilometers. Walking along muddy dirt roads with such a burden was a true test of endurance. But the legionnaires stubbornly carried their home, understanding its true value in the wildlands. Each tent was traditionally called by the beautiful word papilio. Translated from classical Latin, this means butterfly. Such a poetic name for a piece of smelly leather elicits a slight historical chuckle. The fact is that the leather entrance flaps, folded back on the sides, resembled the spread wings of a large insect. During the day, these peculiar wings were always opened to ventilate the stuffy interior. This helped somewhat to get rid of the stale air inside. Natural leather required constant care to prevent it from drying out and cracking. Therefore, the Legionnaires regularly and very generously rubbed it with animal fat. The smell inside was so strong that a modern city dweller would have fainted within the first few minutes. A mixture of sweat, stale lard, and wet wool created the unique aroma of a Roman camp. The soldiers quickly got used to this peculiarity and paid it no mind at all. For them, it was the smell of safety and well-deserved rest. But here's what's truly interesting about this entire strange leather structure. Such a heavy, oiled hide created an absolutely ideal microclimate inside. Not even the strongest northern storm could penetrate the thick walls. 8 adult men exhaled so much heat that it became genuinely hot inside. This worked even during the harshest winter at sub-zero temperatures. The heating was provided exclusively by the internal resources of the human body. Modern polar explorers use a similar principle of group heating on extreme snow expeditions. People lie as close to each other as possible to minimize the loss of precious heat. The Romans simply realized that the human body is the best portable heater under any conditions. The leather dome reliably retained this thermal energy until morning. No additional fires were lit inside the tent for fire safety reasons. Besides, there was physically no room left for an open fire. Of course, the Legionnaires didn't carry this enormous load solely on their own shoulders. The command issued one sturdy mule to each contubernium. This hardy animal carried the tent itself, heavy stakes and millstones for grinding grain. The mule was considered the most important member of the team, cherished more than their own gleaming weapons. The soldiers personally ensured that the animal was well fed and healthy. Losing such a helper meant disaster for the entire small detachment. If the mule died on the march from illness or an enemy arrow, life became drastically more difficult. The soldiers had to carry all the smelly, wet hides on their own backs. The millstones and provisions were also distributed among the exhausted men. Believe me, this was a powerful incentive to carefully look after the pack animal's health. No one wanted to voluntarily take on extra tens of kilograms of cargo. That's why the mule always received its share of care and rest during stops. The process of setting up the tent at the end of a long day had been perfected to the point of complete automatism. This procedure took only a few minutes, even for the most exhausted new recruits. While some soldiers were actively digging a defensive trench, others were setting up camp. They quickly stretched the heavy leather canopy over the pre-prepared wooden stakes. Each person in the group of 8 had a specific task that allowed for no unnecessary movements. No one fumbled about or got in the way of their comrades as they performed the hard work. Modern managers would call this the ideal optimization of work processes under stressful conditions. The Romans simply wanted to go to sleep as quickly as possible and not waste precious time on idle chatter. Inside the tent, there were no folding beds, soft mattresses, or luxurious Persian rugs. Soldiers slept directly on the cold ground in their everyday field uniforms. At best, they managed to spread out a little dry grass or chopped branches. Conditions were as austere as possible and demanded incredible physical endurance. Each person had significantly less than 1 square meter of personal space. You literally breathed down your comrade's neck all night long. A legionnaire physically felt every movement of others in their sleep and heard their snoring. There was no personal space whatsoever, neither day nor night. This lack of personal boundaries turned these rough men into a truly close-knit family. They were bound together by their shared harsh existence more tightly than by blood ties. Sleeping under such conditions required phenomenal trust in those lying right next to you. Over months of endless marches, the legionnaires came to know each other's little habits better than they knew their own wives' habits. If someone began to fall seriously ill, their tent mates were the first to notice it from a change in their breathing. In the modern army, the concept of combat brotherhood is built precisely on such subtle details of daily life. Overcoming the discomforts of the night together forged the unit with incredible strength. This worked far better than any patriotic rhetoric from commanders before a battle. Many barbarian tribes openly mocked the Romans and considered them too pampered because of these tents. The Gauls sincerely believed that a true hardened warrior should sleep right under the open sky in the rain, but the statistics on casualties from common colds and severe frostbite always favored the Roman legions. While the barbarians expended enormous energy trying simply to warm themselves by the fire, the Romans slept peacefully in a dry shelter. Common sense and a reliable leather roof always prevail over empty, primitive bravado in the long run. In the morning, this stuffy leather sphere became the most hated place on earth. At the sharp command of the centurion on duty, the huge camp woke up instantly. The tents had to be taken down as quickly as possible, carefully packed and loaded onto the mules. If it had rained heavily during the night, rolling up the wet, cold canvas turned into a real physical ordeal. But the soldiers did it in silence, fully aware that by evening this smelly tent would save their lives once again. Thus began another day for the most effective military machine in human history. The main secret to a legionnaire's survival at night was not a tent, but his personal cloak. It was this simple item that helped the soldier endure the harshest frosts far from a warm home. This classic rectangular cloak was called a sagum and was a mandatory part of military equipment. It was woven from incredibly dense sheep's wool using special techniques of the time. Modern sleeping bags didn't even exist as a concept back then, so the cloak served as a universal camping blanket. It was so coarse and prickly that a modern pampered person wouldn't be able to wear it for even an hour. The quality of this material was determined not by softness, but solely by its ability to retain precious heat. In the freezing European winter, this unassuming piece of fabric was worth far more than gold or silver. Legionnaires wrapped themselves tightly in it from head to toe to protect themselves reliably from the night drafts. The wool was highly breathable, yet it created an impenetrable barrier against the outside cold. No other fabric of antiquity could boast such outstanding insulating properties. Soldiers literally survived thanks to the daily labor of ordinary Roman weavers. The secret to the Roman cloak's effectiveness lay in a natural animal wax called lanolin. When processing sheep's wool in the workshop, ancient craftsmen deliberately left a large amount of this fat in the fabric. No one attempted to bleach or clean the material to a pristine state for the sake of aesthetics. Thanks to this incredible practicality, the sagum became virtually completely waterproof. It could withstand even torrential cold rain without losing its properties. Water simply could not penetrate the dense natural layer of fat. Drops of moisture instantly rolled down the coarse, stiff woolen fibers to the ground. Meanwhile, the inside of the garment remained completely dry and comfortable for a weary body. It was an amazing ancient counterpart to modern membrane fabrics like sports Gore-Tex. The only difference was that Roman gear weighed several times more than a high-tech jacket. However, during a long military campaign, the extra weight of warm clothing was well worth it. A legionnaire was willing to bravely endure the burden for the chance to wake up alive. Survival in winter often depends directly on who you share your body's precious warmth with. This is very similar to the classic scenario where an old experienced hunter survives a harsh snowstorm. In such stories, a person often warms themselves by pressing tightly against a huge wild wolf or a loyal dog. But instead of a furry beast, the ordinary legionnaire had a stiff woolen cloak and the sturdy shoulder of a frozen comrade. People huddled together in a tight cluster, covering themselves with their sagumas over their thin tunics. This created a powerful, multi-layered defense against absolutely any frost. Modern sleeping bags for mountaineers use an absolutely similar principle of temperature retention. They do not generate heat on their own, but merely retain the heat that the human body continuously emits. Yet the Romans achieved this remarkable effect without any innovative space-age technology or synthetic insulation. Surprisingly, sleeping in full iron armor was strictly forbidden by the legion's official regulations. Any violation of this strict rule was severely punished by the night watch officers. Commanders fully understood the physics of the destructive process of metal cooling in the open air. Metal cools instantly at night and begins to greedily draw living heat from the human body. If one accidentally falls asleep in the steel chainmail or armor in the cold, the consequences would be simply catastrophic. By morning, one is guaranteed to suffer fatal hypothermia of the internal organs and never wake up again. Therefore, before going to sleep, disciplined soldiers would completely remove their cold armor. They would remain only in woolen tunics and wrap themselves in field cloaks. Safety during sleep was always a top priority for the command. The removed armor was neatly folded right next to the sleeping soldier inside the tent. It was arranged so that heavy gear could be put on in a matter of seconds in the event of a sudden nighttime alarm. Sleeping on the bare, frozen ground always carried the risk of severe pneumonia and certain death far from home. Therefore, the legionnaires actively used absolutely any insulation available in the wilderness. Most often, they chopped coniferous branches or gathered a thick layer of dry leaves around their camp. A specific time was set aside daily for this important task before sunset. This primitive forest layer created a life-saving air cushion between the cold ground and the soldier's warm body. Today, well-off tourists use expensive inflatable mats made of lightweight foam for this purpose. The Romans easily made do with ordinary conifer branches, moss, or dry straw. The forest surrounding the camp was a completely free, endless, and accessible resource for every legionary. Gathering such soft bedding was part of the mandatory daily routine, just like digging trenches. No one was too lazy to take care of their own health before a long night. Many history buffs mistakenly believe that soldiers used their huge rectangular shields as blankets. In reality, the famous Roman scutum shield was made of thin, laminated wood. This complex piece of armor was extremely susceptible to moisture and could easily delaminate at the slightest dampness. At night, it was carefully stored in a special, thick leather case. This helped reliably protect the valuable government property from the destructive morning dew. Using it as a hard roof was strictly forbidden by the centurions. Sleeping under such a wooden shield was incredibly hard, very cold, and extremely uncomfortable for a tired back. Wood retains no heat at all and creates an unpleasant greenhouse effect when breathing heavily. Therefore, the good old sheepskin cloak remained the legionnaires' only true salvation in the thick darkness. The wool of the sagum was so dense and coarse that dangerous insects could hardly survive in it. Fleas and lice were the main scourge of absolutely every ancient army during long, unsanitary campaigns. They spread disease and completely deprived soldiers of proper rest before battle. But sheep's wool, heavily impregnated with lanolin, created a powerful chemical and physical barrier against parasites. Small pests could barely chew through such coarse fibers and tried to avoid settling in the cloaks. This naturally reduced the risk of horrific infectious epidemics in crowded areas. Disease often decimated vast regular armies much faster and more effectively than sharp enemy swords. Sanitary conditions and sleep were just as important a strategic weapon of invincible Rome as the sharply honed short gladius. A healthy, well-rested soldier always fights better than a sick and tired one. But the rank-and-file soldier had to pay for this magnificent woolen armor out of his own meager pocket. The cost of the campaign cloak was regularly and ruthlessly deducted from the legionaries' official pay. This constant withholding of earned wages caused a great deal of silent discontent among the ordinary infantrymen. If a soldier lost his sagum through his own foolishness, he faced a double serious problem. Not only did he freeze terribly at night, but he also received a hefty fine from his strict centurion. Therefore, the cloaks were cherished, carefully mended with coarse thread, and carefully preserved for many years. Veterans' gear was often passed down to young, inexperienced recruits or sold for a very good price. Some particularly well-made cloaks served for decades, soaked in the sweat and blood of generations of fearless soldiers. The color of a field cloak was usually natural brown or grayish to avoid drawing the enemy's attention unnecessarily. The red clothing we see in movies was intended mainly for lavish parades and wealthy officers. A dirty gray sagum blended perfectly with the ground, making the sleeping camp much less noticeable. It was a primitive but incredibly effective ancient camouflage for nighttime, because military fashion never took precedence over the desire to survive. In the morning, this cloak once again became outerwear for a long, grueling march. With the first rays of the sun, the legionnaires shook out their cloaks and prepared for another hard day. It absorbed sweat, protected against the icy wind, and cushioned the friction of the heavy backpack against their shoulders. At night, the sagum provided warmth, and by day it helped carry half of a soldier's belongings. It was the most versatile item in the entire arsenal of the invincible Roman military machine. Without this piece of coarse wool, the empire would simply have frozen to death in the forests of northern Europe. The craziest thing about the Roman army was their fanatical love for earthworks. After a grueling 30-kilometer march across rough terrain, not a single soldier was allowed to rest. First, the entire massive legion would simultaneously pull out their heavy field picks and shovels. The men would immediately begin digging a deep trench around the future campsite. This grueling work was carried out in any weather without the slightest leniency. From the dug-up damp earth, the soldiers quickly piled up a high defensive rampart. Sharp wooden stakes were driven into this dense earthen embankment for additional protection. Each legionnaire obediently carried a pair of such logs on his back during the long daytime march. Just imagine the true scale of this incredible daily feat of engineering. They built a full-fledged fortress every night, only to abandon it in the morning. This grueling construction process demanded a colossal expenditure of energy from every man. Setting up camp burned approximately 800 extra calories for each exhausted legionnaire. It sounds like a sophisticated mockery of common sense and the limits of the human body. Many modern professional athletes would have been worn down by such regular physical exertion, but behind this apparent madness lay a truly ingenious military strategy devised by ancient commanders. A securely fortified camp guaranteed safety from any unpleasant surprises in the dark. No sudden nighttime raid by local barbarians could possibly succeed. The enemy was physically unable to sneak up unnoticed on the soldiers sleeping peacefully in their tents. A high earthen rampart and a deep moat reliably stopped any attempt at covert infiltration. This meant that an army of many thousands could sleep a deep, restorative sleep without constant nervous paranoia. Such peace of mind was worth every drop of sweat shed during the daily digging of evening trenches. Inside the camp itself, the canvas tents were by no means set up haphazardly or as best they could. They were arranged according to a strict, predetermined geometric grid of straight streets. It was a fully fledged mobile city, erected each time according to a single, strict standard. The troops literally deployed their infrastructure in an open field in a matter of hours. This temporary city always had its own spacious central square for assemblies. The main command headquarters was located there, as well as a special area for public executions. The distance from the protective earthen rampart to the first row of soldiers' tents was always the same. It consisted of exactly 200 feet of clear, open space without a single structure. This distance had been calculated by military engineers with absolute mathematical precision after many bloody mistakes. The inclusion of such an empty buffer zone in the Legion's strict regulations was by no means accidental. 200 feet is the maximum range of a typical barbarian arrow, especially if that arrow was fired blindly in complete darkness over a high barrier. If the enemy crept up at night and fired a hail of arrows at random, they simply fell onto empty ground. Not a single deadly projectile could physically reach the densely built-up residential quarters. The legionnaires sleeping in their cramped tents were completely out of reach of blind fire. Today, modern, state-of-the-art NATO military bases are built on the exact same principle of buffer zones. What smart architects now calculate on powerful supercomputers, the Romans figured out empirically. All they needed was a simple measuring tape and the harsh combat experience of previous generations. They simply made geometry their primary bodyguard during their nightly rest. The clear street layout had another crucial tactical purpose for the sleeping troops. If a combat alert was suddenly sounded in the camp late at night, every second counted. Soldiers would rush out of their tents in absolute pitch darkness with no sources of bright light. Thanks to the perfect symmetry of the wide streets, every man knew the right direction, even with his eyes closed. A legionnaire clearly understood exactly where to run and where to fall in with his unit. In ordinary barbarian camps, people often stumbled badly over others' feet and scattered belongings while still half asleep. In pitch darkness, terrifying panic would instantly break out, and warriors would mistakenly kill one another. The disciplined Roman legion was completely free from such deadly and senseless chaos. The troops could easily form a perfect battle formation in a matter of minutes, almost without torches. Proper organization of the space literally saved their lives at the most critical moments. Such routine daily formations had a devastating psychological effect on any enemy. Enemy scouts would often sit for hours in the forest thickets, watching the Romans in horror. They could clearly see how the mortally exhausted men methodically erected an impregnable, massive fortress. The barbarians understood perfectly well that attacking these incredibly disciplined fanatics was simply pointless. The desire to attack such a well-prepared fortified position vanished of its own accord. As a result, the Germans often stayed awake all night, nervously clutching their spears in anticipation of a Roman attack. In animalistic fear, they waited for these tireless builders to suddenly launch an offensive themselves. Meanwhile, The Roman legionaries themselves were snoring sweetly behind their thick earthen walls. Every contubernum knew its exact and unchanging place in this vast tent metropolis. No one wasted precious time searching for a free patch of ground for the night. The tents of experienced centurions were always pitched at the very edge of the designated living area. This was done specifically so that officers could react instantly to any noise coming from the wall. Such a well-thought-out arrangement created a strict military hierarchy even during deep sleep. Every tiny cog in this gigantic living system was strictly in its designated place. The Romans managed thousands of people in the field better than we manage projects on the internet. Inside the cramped camp, it was strictly forbidden to light large fires for personal warmth near the tents. The oiled leather of the dwellings and the dry grass on the ground would ignite from any accidental spark. A major fire could completely destroy a legion much faster than a large Gallic army. Fires were lit exclusively in specially designated areas at a completely safe distance from sleeping quarters. Food was prepared in small portions, after which the hot coals were thoroughly doused with water and covered with sand. Toilet areas were always located as far as possible from the central streets and tents. This was done not only because of the obvious odor, but also for the sake of strict military hygiene. If dysentery entered the camp, it decimated soldiers more effectively than any enemy commander. In the morning, when leaving the camp, the Romans would often set fire to wooden stakes and destroy part of the earthen rampart. They did this so that enemies could not use their own fortifications against them. All this titanic labor was undertaken solely for the sake of 8 hours of peaceful sleep for a massive army. And when you grasp this scale, the Romans' obsession with shovels begins to seem like pure genius. They literally buried themselves in the ground every night so they could rise from it in the morning invincible. The peaceful sleep of a massive army would have been impossible without those who guarded that sleep. While thousands of weary legionaries rested in cramped tents, part of the camp remained awake. Perimeter security was always organized with the same maniacal thoroughness as the construction of earthen ramparts. The Romans pragmatically divided the entire dark part of the day into 4 absolutely equal shifts. These regular night watches were called by the elegant term vigilia. The first evening vigil always began precisely at sunset. The fourth and final shift ended with the first bright rays of dawn. The time when darkness fell varied depending on the season, but the number of shifts remained strictly fixed. It was an extremely precise mathematical system for the consistent distribution of military labor. It completely eliminated any confusion or unfairness in the assignment of duties. Each night watch shift lasted exactly 3 hours, with no exceptions whatsoever. The ancient commanders considered this time frame the most optimal for maintaining maximum concentration. If one stands against a cold, drafty wall for longer, the human brain inevitably begins to lose focus. The guard's eyes grow heavy from accumulated fatigue, and his attention quickly drifts away in the darkness. In such a dazed state, the sentry can easily miss a creeping enemy. Modern scientific research on workplace ergonomics fully confirms these ancient observations. Scientists have proven that 3 hours of monotonous work is the absolute limit for the average person. The Romans figured this out 2,000 years ago without any laboratories or brain activity sensors. Practical, hard-won experience and natural observations successfully replaced complex scientific instruments for them. They simply noticed exactly when sentries began to let enemy scouts slip through in the darkness. But how could one measure exactly 3 hours in the midst of absolute, impenetrable night? After all, thick clouds often obscured the guiding stars in the night sky entirely. To solve this complex problem, the camp's central headquarters always used a clepsydra. These were special and highly accurate water clocks, known since the time of ancient Greece. Water dripped from one vessel into another, precisely measuring the night watch's time. As soon as the lower measuring vessel was completely filled with water, the officer on duty gave a loud command. A designated trumpeter would immediately begin to sound the signal for the immediate change of the current guard. It sounds strikingly simple in concept, but it worked flawlessly every single day. This ordinary water literally regulated the heartbeat of the entire massive military machine. No one could dispute the objectivity of the impartial water mechanism. The guard change procedure itself always took place as quietly and smoothly as possible. Commanders strictly ensured that the main body of sleeping soldiers was not awakened unnecessarily. A new squad of fresh soldiers silently climbed the high defensive rampart via special steps. Each sentry taking up his post received a special wooden plaque from his commander. This important piece of equipment was called a tessera and served as a security key. The secret password for that particular night was crudely scratched onto this unassuming plaque. The word changed daily and was known in advance only to trusted individuals in the camp. If a patrol officer unexpectedly approached a sentry, the sentry was required to provide the password and hand over the plaque. This strict protocol ensured that it was indeed a legionnaire standing guard, not a disguised enemy spy. Without the correct wooden plaque, anyone on the wall was considered a dangerous intruder. In addition to the vigilant foot sentries on the walls, there were also mounted patrols. They operated far beyond the illuminated perimeter and the dugout defensive moat. Armed horsemen circled continuously in the darkness, serving as an effective early warning system. Their main task was not to engage in an unequal battle in the dark. The horsemen were only supposed to spot enemy movement in time and quickly raise the alarm. The cavalry listened intently for any unnatural crackling of branches in the nearby dark forest. The riders strained their eyes, gazing into the inky, thick darkness surrounding the camp. They were the outstretched eyes and ears of a sleeping giant, ready to rouse him at the slightest sign of danger. The soundscape of the sleeping camp was vastly different from what we see in Hollywood historical films. There was absolutely none of that eerie, deathly silence before a large-scale battle. The military camp, home to thousands, constantly emitted a quiet but very steady hum. The heavy footsteps of patrolling soldiers in nail-studded sandals could be heard everywhere. From the direction of the pens came the quiet neighing of war horses and the snorting of weary pack mules. Added to this was the periodic clang of metal during the organized changing of the night watch and the snoring of thousands of people. This monotonous background noise actually helped the exhausted soldiers sleep much more soundly. Modern white noise generators for babies work on exactly the same acoustic principle. If an ordinary soldier was assigned to the third watch, it was considered the hardest ordeal. You had to wake up in the dead of night, when sleep is especially sweet and incredibly deep. Then you had to stand for 3 long hours in the biting cold, staring into a frightening void. And after a grueling shift, you had to try to fall asleep again for the short remainder of the night. Your biological rhythms were thrown off, and the entire next day you felt like a battered piece of meat. That is why the centurions took great care to ensure that the duty rosters were constantly and fairly rotated. No one was allowed to get easy shifts every day, not even the centurions' favored favorites. During the watch itself, sentries were strictly forbidden to sit, lean against the wall, or put down their weapons. They were required to constantly pace back and forth along the earthen rampart, actively pumping blood through their veins. Movement was the only reliable way to keep from freezing and to prevent the brain from shutting down in the silence of the night. If you stopped for even 5 minutes, you risked falling asleep and dooming the entire legion. The monotonous, unceasing walking turned into a kind of trance-like meditation on survival. Officers inspected the posts completely at random to keep the sentries on high alert at all times. Sometimes a strict centurion would sneak up from behind to test a soldier's reaction to a sudden noise. No amount of exhaustion served as an excuse for the slightest lapse in vigilance at a combat post. The watch system ran like a Swiss clock, with living, weary men serving as its cogs. And to ensure these cogs never faltered, Rome had a special, rather gruesome motivational tool in reserve, which we will discuss in the next chapter. The most terrible crime in the Roman army was not desertion or losing one's shield. The worst thing a legionary could do was fall asleep during his night watch on the wall. If a sentry fell asleep, he literally opened the camp gates to an enemy massacre in pitch darkness. For such a mistake, he wasn't simply stripped of his pay or sent to clean the soldiers' latrines. For closing one's eyes on duty, Rome demanded the ultimate price, the offender's own life. The punishment for sleeping on duty was called the fostorium, and it was a truly diabolical ritual. The trial took place quickly, right in the morning before the entire legion assembled, so that everyone would learn this bloody lesson. The tribune would approach the sleeping sentry and lightly touch his shoulder with a special wooden stick. This was the signal after which the accused man's comrades were required to beat him to death with clubs. Yes, you heard correctly. The executioners were the very same men with whom he shared a tent. Why did the commanders force soldiers to kill their own tentmate? This was the genius and terrifying psychology of collective army responsibility. A man had fallen asleep and endangered the lives of the very people sleeping in his tent. They punished him not for violating some abstract regulation, but for betraying their personal safety. This instantly quashed any pity and made discipline the responsibility of every rank-and-file soldier. It sounds like absolute barbarism, but it worked better than any modern corporate fines. When you stand in the piercing wind at night, your eyes closing from leaden fatigue, you remember the fusterium. You remember the sound of dull blows raining down on the bodies and faces of your friends, full of blind fury. The fear of a painful death at the hands of your comrades injected such a dose of adrenaline into your blood that it banished sleep in an instant. It was the most brutal, yet most effective energy drink of antiquity. If by some miracle a soldier managed to survive this barrage of brutal blows with clubs, his life was over. He was banished from the camp forever, forbidden to return to Rome or to his family. In essence, he became a walking dead man, having lost his honor, his homeland, and the right to call himself a man. In the ancient world, becoming an outcast in the wild forest was tantamount to a painful, delayed death. Therefore, many preferred to die under the clubs rather than eke out a miserable existence as an exile. Interestingly, officers also bore severe responsibility for organizing night watch. If a centurion failed to check the posts and the enemy broke through into the camp, the exact same fate awaited him. This system of collective responsibility showed no mercy to either green recruits or distinguished veterans. Fatigue after a march, illness, or bad weather were never accepted by the tribunal as excuses. The law was simple. Either you keep your eyes open or you close them forever. Modern corporations try to motivate employees with free coffee and plush beanbags in the office. The Romans motivated their people with fear and a crystal clear understanding of the cost of any mistake. Of course, Rome's methods are absolutely unacceptable in modern civilized society, but it is impossible to deny the fact that it was precisely this brutal order that built an empire that lasted 1,000 years. They understood the nature of human weakness and burned it out with the red-hot iron of military discipline. That is precisely why the phrase, "to sleep like the dead," in a Roman camp could have a completely literal meaning. Every night was a test of endurance, where the weakness of one could destroy tens of thousands. This paranoid obsession with the security of sleep turned the Roman infantry into an invincible machine. The barbarians relied on blind luck and the darkness of night in their surprise guerrilla attacks. The Romans relied only on the geometry of the moat, the thickness of their woolen cloaks, and a deadly fear of the fusterium. As a result, this system meant that soldiers almost never fell asleep on duty. The risk was so disproportionate to the fleeting pleasure of a nap that the instinct for self-preservation took over. This perfect, albeit bloody, mathematics of the night watch became the foundation of all the legion's victories. And while Rome's enemies shivered from the cold in the night forest, the legionaries slept peacefully. They knew that their peace was guarded by the most ruthless, disciplinary machine of the ancient world. The Roman army conquered half the known world not only because they had sharp swords. They won because they learned to manage human fatigue better than anyone else in ancient history. Their field sleep was not merely rest, it was a logistical marvel elevated to an absolute. The tent, the woolen cloak, the earthen trench, and the relentless night watch merged into a single symphony of safety. It was a triumph of engineering over chaos, cold, and the primal fear of darkness. Every night they reshaped the wilderness to suit their needs, creating islands of iron discipline. Modern sleep science constantly reminds us of the importance of routine, the right temperature, and the absence of stress. The legionnaires couldn't read medical journals, but they followed all these rules perfectly in practice. They understood that good sleep is the best biological weapon one can give a soldier. And this weapon worked flawlessly throughout the long centuries of bloody European wars. In the morning after the wake-up call, the camp came to life in a matter of seconds with frightening efficiency. Tents were folded up, mules were loaded with heavy leather gear, and the refreshed legionnaires formed into neat columns. Ahead of them lay another 30 kilometers of grueling march, and perhaps a brutal battle to the death. But they took their first step alert, full of strength, and confident in their superiority. And all this thanks to those 8 hours they spent under a piece of smelly calfskin. The history of the Roman legion teaches us one very simple but important life lesson. The most magnificent victories are often forged not on the battlefield, but in the dull, daily, and monotonous routine. Heroism is great, but a well-rested and warm soldier will always defeat a tired and frozen hero. Remember this the next time you decide to sacrifice sleep for an extra hour of work or a TV show. Even mighty Rome needed a good rest to rule the entire world. If you enjoyed this dive into the harsh realities of daily life in the ancient world, be sure to support this video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new analyses of the hidden mechanisms of great historical eras. Write in the comments, could you spend even one night in a Roman tent like this during the winter? Like the video, share it with your friends, and remember, history is always more interesting than it seems at first glance. See you soon in new episodes, and I hope you always sleep safely.